Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. As you heard, my name is Hege Eriksen. I'm a journalist at NRK, and I will moderate this session with some exclusive guests who will shed a light on the current press situation in Israel. For 2 years, international journalists have been shut out of Gaza. Inside, Palestinian journalists are doing the job under fire, risking their lives to tell the story. So far, over 250 journalists have been killed in the war. And without independent access, we cannot see what is real. That's why the Foreign Press Association has taken the extraordinary steps of suing the State of Israel in the Supreme Court to get access. And the questions remain. Why are reporters still locked outside? What does that mean for the truth? And what has to change so that the world can see for itself? Our first guest tonight is at the heart of this fight. Anat Saragusti is a living press legend. She's a journalist, photographer, editor, and now head of press freedom at the Union of Journalists in Israel. She's covered basically every war in the region for the last 4 decades. She has been a correspondent in Gaza for Channel 2 in Israel for 25 years. We'll start with her, and then we'll bring in NRK's Sissel Wold and Vebjørn Selbekk from the newspaper Dagen. And at the end, we'll open up for questions for you. But first, please join me in a warm welcome of Anat Saragusti. You can sit here. Have a seat. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are so pleased that you can come. You have been around for many decades. You have covered so many wars. You've been a correspondent in Gaza for 25 years. Can you just take us back to those days where you could just drive into Gaza and how was it back then?
So first I want to say that I'm an Israeli, but I'm not representing the state of Israel, nor am I representing the government of Israel or the policies of Israel. So I speak for myself as a journalist, as the press freedom officer at the Union of Journalists. Look, Israel is very small. I mean, for Norwegians, it's like tiny. It's an hour drive from my house in Tel Aviv to Gaza. So I used to put my son in school and drive to Gaza and go back in the evening and do a TV story. It was open and accessible and sad because there was occupation there. And I was covering, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as you said, for decades in the West Bank and in Gaza. So I worked in Gaza intensively. I still have some friends there, some contacts that I keep in touch with, and it's heartbreaking to speak to them during this war and, to hear on a personal basis what they are going through and unable to help them, it's like really very painful. So in those days, I tried to give some names and faces to the Palestinians in Gaza, to the Israeli audience, so they will see that there are people there that have dreams and careers and, that they are not a mob of terrorists like Israelis tend to think about the people in Gaza, that they are all terrorists and they want to throw us to the Mediterranean Sea. And at that time, it was still possible to do that. But when Hamas took over in 2006, it was no longer possible for Israeli journalists to enter Gaza. And then it the blockade on Gaza made everything very, very distant, and it was much more difficult to, bring out the stories, the human stories of the Palestinians in Gaza.
So how has the Israeli coverage changed since then?
It has changed, so the coverage of the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, was through a framework of the security threat only. Whether they are threatening us, who are they, Hamas. Hamas is a jihadist organization. I remember that Israel nurtured it starting at the late 80s because it wanted to weaken the secular fractions of the PLO, so it decided if they will nurture Hamas and let it grow, it will split the Palestinian politics in two. This way, divide and conquer, This was the mindset. So over the years, they used Hamas to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. This was like, a mechanism or a means. So the coverage was shifting accordingly. They would cover Gaza as if it's a huge threat to the existence of the state of Israel, and not as if there are 2 million people living there.
And then came 7th of October.
I think before the 7th of October, this last government took office at the end of 22, and the minute it took office, it declared a kind of a war on the democratic institutions in the country. Mainly, they want to implement a judicial overhaul to target the independence of the justice system in the country and on the free press in the country. So they kind of had a master plan to weaken the free press in the country since then. And people in Israel, it's important to say that hundreds of thousands of Israelis came out to the street to protest against those measures that they wanted to implement against the judicial overhaul, etc. And it was very, very intensive protests all over the country for, until October 7th. I mean, every week, almost sometimes every day, people would go out to the street to protest against the government. And then October 7th happened, it was...
How was that for you? I mean, you have devoted so many years of your life trying to portray a human face to the Palestinians in Gaza, and then this monumental shock happens. How has that affected you?
It was a shock for all of us. I mean, we woke up at October 7th, it was Saturday, 6:29 in the morning, from, sirens all over the country calling us to go take shelter, and rockets. And slowly we start to understand the scale of the massacre. And I was very worried because a very good friend of mine lived in a small community in a kibbutz near the border with Gaza, and we lost contact with her at about 11 o'clock in the morning. She could no longer text, and we were really worried. So everything was very personal, It's not only the event, the massacre, and the 1,200 people that were slaughtered, and the 251 people that were taken hostage. It was something, very personal, because I knew somebody there and I was worried about her, and she was really a peace activist. So it was really shocking And we still carry this pain. I mean, this is very painful, what happened on October 7th, and it's really very hard to, you know, lift yourself from this sorrow of, you know, everything broke, everything you believed in, everything, you know, and it's been dire since, you know, the war and the casualties and what's going on in Gaza. I mean, it's...
How did this fundamentally change everything?
The Israelis were really shocked, and I think to try to recover from the shock, they used extensive measures against the Palestinians, and it seems like they were engaged in revenge and to try to reclaim the honor, you know, and not necessarily a strategic mechanism to, I don't know, prevent something, because 3,500 Hamas and Jihad militants were occupying the small communities on the border. This is not trivial for the country that was famed for having the strongest military in the army in the Middle East, and maybe the 5th in the world, you know, with all the technology and the intelligence and everything, and suddenly, you know, 3,000 militants coming from Gaza could occupy whole communities and do something so cruel in one day. This was really shocking, because people didn't understand where is the army that was supposed to protect them, and where is all the technology, and where is all intelligence, and, you know, all the advanced equipment that Israel has. Everything collapsed. It was unbelievable, and still people feel insecure. So it was a feeling of insecurity, very, very deep and authentic feeling of insecurity.
And this, of course, has affected also the way the press deals with the situation, both like internationally and also in Israel. I want to ask you, because for 2 years, as I said, the international press has been barred from entering Gaza. What is actually the official explanation given from the authorities?
Oh, it's very easy. I mean, everything is affiliated with the state security. So until October 7th, Israeli journalists could not enter Gaza, but the foreign press could enter Gaza. And they used to enter Gaza. I mean, it was not headline news in the world, because the news cycle was not in Gaza, but sometimes. But they could enter Gaza, and I think every major media outlet in the world had stringers in Gaza. But on October 7th, everything shut down, and nobody could enter Gaza anymore. And it was explained because of security and military operations. They said they could not care for journalists, foreign people running around Gaza when they have to operate the army, and they cannot, it would not be secure for them. And the only way to enter Gaza since the ground operation started was through under the umbrella of the military spokesperson, and he's the one that decides who can get in and who cannot. Embedded in what army unit, who can be interviewed. Journalists need to sign a waiver before they enter Gaza with the IDF spokesperson, giving authorization to the army to look at the footage and decide what can be aired and what not. And above all this, there is a military censorship that can decide, you know. So everything was heavily filtered and modified in a way that, you know, by the army. So it's not really free coverage of Gaza. And the army used to pick international journalists according to what audiences they want to convey the messages. For example, I remember that they took, I think, New York Times crew to see the tunnels that Hamas built underneath a hospital in Gaza, and the Fox News reporter to see something else because they wanted to convey the messages, you know, to the American audiences. So they used the journalists to do that. And it's a real dilemma for journalists whether to comply to these regulations and, you know, this umbrella or deny it. And I don't know what, I think I would go if I was a journalist just to see, you know, to have this sense. They were not allowed to interview Palestinians, of course, and they watched the Palestinians only from a distance. And on the other side, there were only the Palestinian journalists who could cover what's going on in Gaza. And I guess that I say it very carefully, I guess that some of them were manipulated by Hamas. I mean, I guess Hamas is not like a beacon of free press and freedom of expression. I mean, this is the educated guess. On the other hand, as you said in your introduction, 250 Palestinian journalists were killed in this war. I mean, this has been the deadliest war for journalists in the world since they start counting and monitoring.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
But you have covered several wars in Gaza, and so has many colleagues here in Norway. What was the reaction to the shutdown from the Israeli governmental side? What was the reactions in the Israeli press? What was your reaction to it?
First of all, it happened every war, the closure. But this war has been 2 years in action, and it's never been like that. I mean, the longest operation in Gaza was in 2014, and it lasted 50 days, not 2 years. I mean, more than 700 days of blockade. This is really, really long. For Israeli journalists, or maybe for the majority of the Israeli institutional media, they didn't complain. They didn't complain, and they hardly made disclaimers to the viewers on television that the footage is under the umbrella of the army, and some of the footage was obtained by the army, you know, a GoPro of the soldiers. So the army decided what kind of footage can be, you know, useful and used by the press in Israel, and they didn't think that something is lacking because they were engaged in, first of all, in the pain and the shock that we are all engaged in. And also they thought that there was a small debate in the beginning of the war of one journalist wrote an op-ed at Haaretz saying that we journalists have to keep the morale of the people because this is an existential war and we are engaged in a war and we shouldn't be the opposition to the army or to the government or whatever. But it was a very, very small and not very echoing debate among journalists. I, of course, don't think that way. Maybe I'm an old schooler, but I think that journalists have a duty, you know, to report what is going on, and reporting on what's going on in Gaza, that doesn't necessarily mean that you identify with Hamas. I mean, there is no argue about the fact that Hamas are the villains, but that doesn't mean that you should not cover what's going on in Gaza. Many people in Israel don't care what's going on in Gaza. They think that they are all Hamas supporters, therefore there are no innocent people there. Many politicians express this rhetoric as if there are no innocent people in Gaza and they're all Hamas supporters, therefore they are all, I don't know, deserve to die, whatever. They don't care about that. They just ignored this part. I remember I wrote an op-ed on October 16, 2023, saying that this is the way the Israeli media is covering the war. It's like a one-sided war. So because it covers it only from the viewpoint of the Israelis and not, 360 degrees like they should. And unfortunately, this is still the situation, and they don't give the full picture of what's going on in Gaza, what is being done in their names. What you see outside of Israel, it's like a mirror picture of what we see in Israel. What we see in Israel is only our troops, and what you see outside of Israel is the atrocities in Gaza, the high percentage of human casualties, children, starvation, destruction, a huge scale of humanitarian crisis in Gaza. You see that, we don't see it. It's not facilitated to the Israeli audience in Hebrew. I mean, they can log on and see, and they can watch CNN, BBC, everything, but they don't get it in Hebrew.
What do you actually see then? What is served to the general public?
So the media was, and Haaretz is not part of it. What I'm saying is generalizing about the mainstream media in Israel. Haaretz is very criticized, and Haaretz is the only newspaper that covers what's going on in Gaza. But in general, the Israeli media was highly engaged with the stories of the Israeli hostages, who were taken hostage on October 7th, 251 of them, and they kept it at the headline of the news. And this was extremely important because if it was for the politicians, they wouldn't want to hear about it. They wanted to continue the war until the total victory or whatever, elimination of Hamas, But so it was the Israeli media that kept it high on the public agenda until the last live hostage was released 2-3 weeks ago, thanks to President Trump, who imposed this on both sides. This was the main kind of mission that the Israeli journalists took upon themselves, and I think rightly so. I mean, because nobody else, I think the world was less engaged in these Israeli hostages that were taken, babies and children and women taking hostage. And the rest was, telling time and again the stories of the soldiers that fell in combat and the heroism of the soldiers. In a way, the Israeli media was still telling the story of October 7th, time and again, until today. It's like they were stuck on October 7th. They didn't proceed from there to show. And in a way, they strengthened the belief of many, many people in Israel as if all the protests in the world to end the war and against the war and is anti-Semitism and not a legitimate criticism against the policy of the state of Israel, And this is shameful because they didn't give the people the context of what's going on in the world. And why the world is so angry.
Actually, you say, is it portrayed as anti-Semitism when
yes.
they see, in what way?
All the demonstrations against the war in the world are framed as anti-Semitic by the politicians in Israel, by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and by many journalists, unfortunately. They do not make the distinction between a legitimate protest against the war and the policy of Israel and, the hardship of the Palestinians, the innocent people in Gaza, and anti-Semitism. And I guess there is, in the margin of that, there is anti-Semitism as well. I don't underestimate that. I think it's important to fight that. But not all of the protests in the world were coming of, anti-Semitic motives. And the media did not make this difference.
You've said actually that the Israeli media is betraying its duty on Gaza, which is very harsh critic of your colleagues. But if you look at, for example, the press in Ukraine, I mean, to what extent can you expect a national press with a nation in war, delivering on objective ideals? I mean, do you understand also? I mean, how do you see your colleagues?
It's an excellent question. Look, I don't know much about, I'm not an expert on the Ukrainian war. I think it's a little bit different situation. And I would be careful in the comparison. Look, it's a real dilemma. What are you first? Are you first a patriot Israeli who wants your kind of state, country to win this war? Or are you first a journalist who has a duty to report whatever? It's an also unsolved dilemma. I don't know. There is no right answer to that. But in general, I think somebody had to or have to give the factual reality on the ground to the Israeli public. And I think it's coming out of not only of pain, but also the journalists in Israel are intimidated by the government. As I told you, when this government took office, they declared a war on the free press in the country, and they have this master plan. This master plan is like a playbook of populist government. So they introduced a lot of legislation targeting the public broadcaster. They want to shut it down. They want to privatize it. They want to defund it. They want to take all kinds of measures to weaken the public broadcaster. They want to mess around in the commercial television. They're trying to they are giving benefits to the only media outlet that completely aligns with the ideology of the government and of Prime Minister Netanyahu. They are imposing sanctions on Haaretz because Haaretz is too critical to the government. So they are imposing sanctions on Haaretz. We at the Union of Journalists filed an appeal to the Supreme Court against these sanctions because we think they cannot use taxpayers' money to punish a newspaper that is too critical to the government. They try to impose a politician as a chief editor of the Channel 13 television news. We also had a petition to the Supreme Court, and we managed to cancel this attempt to take control, political takeover of this channel. There is an organized and sometimes funded smear campaign against journalists and media outlets. Prime Minister Netanyahu is involved in that heavily.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, he didn't give interview, as a journalist interview in Hebrew for over 4 years. He speaks above the heads of the journalists, very rarely opens his press conferences to questions, and when he does and journalists ask questions, he mocks them, ridicules them, he calls them liars, biased. He said, this is not a question, this is a statement. He never answers properly to any question. Every time he goes on his social media in live video, he said something bad about journalists and the media outlets. He called them poisoning channels. His supporters called them Al Jazeera channels to indicate that they are engaged in treason. I mean, he undermines the profession and the press freedom, and he wants to create untrust among his supporters. And sometimes there are physical attacks against journalists when they go out for coverage, and some crews were physically attacked. So it's maybe effective, and some journalists adopt self-censorship. And this is something that you cannot quantify. And so maybe the war in Gaza is like a segue to show that they are patriots and that they are not, engaged in treason. I don't know what. Mm-hmm. So this is something. I'll give you an example. A few months ago, there was a leak from text messages in a closed WhatsApp group from Channel 12 News, which is the most distributed news channel in the country. And there were only 2 journalists in this group that said that they should cover what's going on in Gaza. And the senior editors there in this group said, we don't want to hear what's going on in Gaza. We are now telling the stories of the hostages, and you cannot compare the suffering of the hostages with the suffering of the people in Gaza. We don't want to do that. And that was the end of the discussion. So you understand that there is some, I don't know if it's not a real discussion, but people try to say that they should do more, and they were silenced. And for the starvation, for example, on July, the story of the starvation was headlines all over the world. And the way the Israeli media chose to cover it was not to speak about the starvation, but to speak about how the world is covering the starvation in Gaza and how Hamas is using it as a tool in their propaganda, which may be true. But on the other hand, if you look at the facts, Israel at a certain point decided not to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. So that created the domino effect that ended up in starvation. I mean, this is part of the sequence of the events. So, they're trying to avoid covering what's going on in Gaza, and unfortunately they don't join the Foreign Press Association with their petition to the Supreme Court, while we join them as amicus of the court, because we think, at the Union of Journalists, we do think that it's important for the international press to get into Gaza, because then we would know, and all these arguments about how many casualties were, how many children, distractions, all that can be solved if they let the foreign press in. Now that there is a ceasefire.
We're going to talk more about the challenges of the fact-checking. We're going to widen a bit the conversation. Okay. And joining us on stage is NRK journalist Sissel Wold. Welcome. And editor-in-chief of the newspaper Dagen, Vebjørn Selbekk. Have a seat, both of you. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is a very interesting conversation. I want us to discuss and elaborate a bit on what Anat already has told us. But just to start, Sissel, you have been a correspondent for NRK for several periods in the Middle East. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience from covering the previous wars in Gaza?
The first war I covered in Gaza was 2008-2009, and then we were allowed in after the war had finished. And that was very important, of course, because we could see a lot of sort of what had happened there, talk to people. And we also saw a lot of the graffiti that the Israeli soldiers had been writing on the walls in Palestinians' homes, for example, and the destruction. And the war in 2014, we could cover from inside Gaza. That was very scary, of course, because in Israel you have alarms. Every time there is a rocket, there is an alarm. You have 15 seconds, 20 seconds. There are a lot of shelters everywhere. But in Gaza, there is nothing. It just boom, and you just need to make sure you don't have bad luck. So that's very, very scary because Gaza is very small, very claustrophobic. So then we could cover the war. But I remember we were staying in this Al-Deira hotel, which was like a hotel where a lot of journalists were staying. And it was on the non-target list. That's what we heard, the non-target list. And I think also when we were driving around, I trust the Israeli Shin Bet, the surveillance, because there were drones everywhere. So, you think they know that we are journalists and they should not target us. I mean, that's what you hope for, that you won't get targeted. And it is so important to be there. To be inside Gaza is just so important. So it feels very frustrating now that it's impossible to get in. And I think that the way that NRK has been covering it is with 2 teams that are providing us with pictures, and my colleagues are telling them what kind of story we would like them to film, to do interviews for. And the other thing is the Norwegian doctors for Nurvak and Doctors Without Borders also. They have sort of been our correspondents on the ground, and they are not supposed to be reporting. They are supposed to be in the hospitals saving people's lives. And then we have, YouTubers, bloggers, Instagrammers. This is the way we get our information. But this is not the right way to cover a war.
And Vebjørn Selbekk, you are also known for a strong engagement in Israel and also in freedom of expression. Could you just tell us a bit about your drive on the topic? I mean, what is fueling your strong engagement in this case?
Yeah, first of all, I strongly support the claim that international journalists should be allowed into the Gaza Strip. That's very, very important. I mean, and I think one of the things that we have been very good at doing here in the West during the war is covering the human suffering. That is very, very important. And I can see the problem that you are describing, Anat, about it's not being easy for a national press to cover it, to cover the suffering on the other side. I mean, you have had the hostage problem, and now, thank God, it's solved, and all the living hostages are back. But this has been a national trauma for the Israeli society, and I think we have been very clever at covering the human suffering on the Gaza Strip, but in my opinion, we have not been equally good at covering what the hostage situation has meant to the Israeli society and what kind of trauma this is. And it's not only like a normal terrorist attack. This has to do with the history of Israel. Israel being proclaimed as a national home for the Jewish people. This should be a safe haven for Jews all over the world. And then this happens inside the Israeli borders. I think that trauma, I don't think we have captured that good enough. And I think that that's also very interesting things to write about and to cover.
What do you think about that, Anat?
I think he's right. I mean, we are traumatic. It was a severe trauma. It was the most horrible day for Israelis since the Holocaust. This is what they say, since the establishment of the State of Israel. It's not And another event, it can't be compared to another military campaign in Gaza. And in one day, 1,200 people were slaughtered, including babies that were burned to their deaths, and including my friend, as I told you, Vivian Silver, who was burned, her safe room was burned to ashes. It was really, really something very, very traumatic. But this is part of a context, and I know, there is an occupation in the West Bank and Gaza since 1967, and this brings a lot of events. And this is just another chapter of this ongoing occupation, the fact that this conflict, regretfully so, was not solved, although you had the, invested in the Oslo Accord. This has not been solved, and there is no peace for anybody in the region, including not the Jewish people or the Israelis or whoever. So it's a very, very traumatic chapter in this, history.
Cecil, what do you think about Vebjørn's argument that we've covered too much, maybe the suffering, and not balancing it, looking at the existential threat that Israel is exposed to as a consequence of events?
I think that we moved quickly forward to the war in Gaza because it was so brutal. I think that the army felt very much ashamed that it sort of collapsed on that day. So the revenge and the want, the anger was very, very strong when the army attacked. And I think everybody was so shocked by the war. So that became the story. And the Israelis were stuck in 7th of October for the next year and a half. They were stuck there. And as a reporter being there, you felt like the Israelis were completely in a bubble. And that, the war got more and more brutal and more people were killed. So that became the story outside Israel. And, I'm thinking, what will happen with the Israelis when the foreign press do enter Gaza? Because now, a few weeks ago, Haaretz wrote that in the foreign department, in the Department of Justice, maybe even in the IDF, they know that they cannot shut out the press forever because there is a ceasefire now. The situation is changed. And also in the Supreme Court, they know that the situation has changed. And when the Israeli government or whoever says that it's too dangerous for journalists to come in, well, it is the journalists and it's their editors who are the ones to say, is this dangerous for us or should we take the chance to go in? I mean, usually you take the chance to go in because many people want to cover the war or want to come after, and it's important. So I'm thinking a lot about, what will happen when CNN, New York Times, everybody, BBC will come in and get the stories, see the amount of destruction. Even Jared Kushner said that it looked like a nuclear bomb had been dropped there. And, will that affect the Israeli public, that I feel completely live in a bubble? And I think I really need to say this, that, the lack of covering of the suffering in Gaza, but the Israelis have no idea what's really going on in their names, and they don't understand why the world is reacting to what is going on in their names, what has been taking place in their names in Gaza. This is very worrisome, I think. But who wants to look in the mirror and see what your state has done in your name?
Yes, on the other hand,
a lot about this.
70% of the Israelis were protesting to bring back the hostages and end the war. So for months, protesting in the streets every Saturday to end the war and bring back the hostages. They understood that this is the deal. If you end the war, the hostages will be back. And this is what eventually happened, many, many months too late.
Yeah, well, that's also one thing I think we have not covered enough in the West or in Norway, the diversity of the Israeli society. I mean, I think most Norwegians think that Israel society, the Israeli society is one. They are just like one big block. They are agree. All people agree, but that's not the case. I mean, Israel is a vibrant democracy. Netanyahu has had very strong opposition during these 2 years of war, and even before the war. I mean, the general strike, the threat from the army, the reservists, that they would not serve in the army anymore. I mean, it's so much more debate than we see here in our country, and I think in all over the Western world. And that is also, and I mean now, what will be the fate of Netanyahu? I agree with what you were saying about the parallel between the United States and Israel when it comes to authoritarianism and attacks against the free press. This is in a way mirroring what's happening in the United States. I mean, fake news, attacks against the free press, but still the press in Israel is much freer than anywhere in the region. I mean, you couldn't have an Anat in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip and in most of the Muslim neighboring countries to Israel. So this is also important to say, I think.
But what is your reaction when you hear actually the attacks, the continuous attacks on freedom of press in Israel? I mean, what is your reaction to that?
It's worrisome. It's worrisome. And I see it as a part of the new populist attack that we see not only in Israel, we see it in most of all in the United States. We see it also in European countries, Hungary, for example. And this is very worrisome, and we have to fight back and push back.
How are you going to fight back and push back, or we? I mean, Sissel, you have participated in demonstrations calling for the access for journalists into Gaza. But what can you actually do when the borders are shut down?
I think, there is a court case. Anat is also fighting for this, to take, the Foreign Press Association has sort of sued, like you mentioned, the state, and they know that things are changed now because there is a ceasefire. So there is another, I don't know now, 25 days, and they will make a decision again. You just need to sort of make noise and just continue talking about it. And I know that the government press office, who are giving out the press cards in Israel, you need the government press office press card to work there. They are being called all the time. I heard some colleagues of mine were calling them, and they were saying at the office there, they are driving us crazy. They're calling from all over the world. This kind of pressure is important. And me and Thomas, we went to the Israeli embassy here in Oslo to ask the acting ambassador, please do something about this. So it just helps. You just need to continue talking about it. And also, Israel sees itself as a democracy. And then, what about free press? What about letting press into Gaza? You cannot close them out forever.
But the authorities in Israel says that security issues are not allowing the press in.
No. Now they say that they have to update their position, since there is a new situation on the ground. And they asked the Supreme Court to wait 30 days for them to, draft something new. So the press office and everybody is waiting for the ruling of the court. I don't know. I hope they will rule, to open, because supposedly there is a ceasefire now. So it's up to the journalists to decide whether it's safe for them to go in and not to impose the blockade on Gaza.
Yeah, what do you think, Vebjørn, about how valid is the argument of security and safety for you're an editor? Would you send?
Well, this is for the editors and the news outlets to decide. This is not a governmental issue. I mean, newspaper, TV stations, we have to decide for ourselves if it is safe to send our journalists into what could be harm's way. I mean, that's a difficult situation, and you have to be prepared, but it's not a state issue, it's a press issue.
Why do they do this?
It's not in Israel's interest to have a big coverage from Gaza, and the acting ambassador was telling us that he thinks that the coverage of the Gaza war is unfavorable to Israel. And I said, you know, what do you expect? I mean, you killed 60,000 people and just ruined the Strip. What do you expect? So I think it is not in the interest of the Netanyahu government. But I think also, you know, entering Gaza it's always risky. And now you have a lot of armed Palestinian gangs roaming around the street. It's a bit like it used to be before Hamas came to power. And I think also covering the West Bank is quite risky because you have a crazy settler there with guns. It's also, I feel very unsure when I am there now. So it's, I mean, the Middle East is the Middle East.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, for Israeli journalists, this has been difficult or impossible since, not since just since the war, but since 2006, since the Hamas takeover. I mean, you've been targets since they took power in 2006, 2007. I mean, you could have had a hostage situation with Israeli journalists. You could have Israeli members of the press in Hamas dungeons. I mean, that would be an impossible situation. So it's not only the Israeli government that is limiting access. I mean, also the situation on the Gaza Strip since 2006 has also limited access for Israeli journalists, and that's also been had a huge impact on how Gaza has been being portrayed in Israeli media, I think.
Now, this is why we have to rely on the international press to get into Gaza and be our sources to what's going on there.
Yeah, but that's also, I mean, a problem because, okay, I mean, now during the war, we NRK and other Norwegian news outlets have been relying on Palestinian stringers on the Gaza Strip, and they're doing a very good job portraying the human suffering, but there are limits to what they can do because they are operating under Hamas rule. And they can't operate as free journalists as we think of it here in our part of the world.
They cannot criticize Hamas. They cannot, they cannot tell what's going on there. They're under the control of Hamas. It's very, very difficult. Hamas, as I said, it's not a beacon of free press and freedom of expression.
So how can we really rely on information coming from them?
They are the best we have, because otherwise we have nothing. But they cannot walk around and ask people, do you hate the Hamas? It's very difficult for them to do so. And people would be scared to answer. But one of the doctors, the Norwegian doctors, he told me that his impression is that 90% of the Palestinians hate the Hamas now, because Hamas is the reason why they are in this situation now. But these are just things you hear. You don't know if it's right or not. Probably it's right. But the patients he has been treating don't like Hamas. But, this is a small group, and it's difficult. But what I will say is that when I was covering Gaza for, many years, I don't know how many times I've been there, Hamas made it more and more difficult to enter. Because before, you needed an Israeli press card. That was your ticket into Gaza. But then Hamas were asking for more and more documentation, papers. And last time I was there, 2021, there was so much hassle. We were sitting and waiting for hours to get in at the Hamas checkpoint. So they didn't make it easy either.
We can continue talking, but I think we will open up for some questions from the audience. If we have a microphone that we can pass around, Please raise your hands if you have any questions you want to ask the panel. Anybody? Yes.
Lilla.
Lila.
I was just wondering about two issues. One thing, two of these issues I read in your book, Sissel. One thing is that the kibbutz, the attack started in the morning at 6:30, and the IDF soldiers arrived at 3:30, wasn't it, in the afternoon?
It was.
And I haven't been in that area for 20 years, but even then, I didn't think it would be possible that the IDF soldiers would take so long to enter. So I was wondering, how much does the Israeli audience know about this, and how do they react? Also, both of you were talking about, or I read in the book, and also you were talking about Israel actually funding or supporting Hamas in the start. Sissel is writing about suitcases with dollars that the Israeli government knows is being handed over to Hamas. And this is also a thing I would say that if I was an Israeli, I would be furious. And I wonder, how much do they know about this?
Oh, they know about this. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu deliberately strengthened Hamas to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. And he was the one that opened the gate for the Qatari money, cash money, to enter Gaza in suitcases. Can you imagine? Millions of dollars would be transferred from Qatar to Hamas to pay salaries, to keep them going. And they sold us the notion that this money will keep Hamas silent and satisfied, and this is why, and Hamas is deterred, and that they are not conspiring, any terror operation against Israel, and everything failed on October 7th. So yeah, the army did not function, and everybody was asking, where is the army? And actually, on October 7th, the leading conspiracy theory was that the army deliberately failed Prime Minister Netanyahu. They did not reveal, or they collaborated with Hamas, or they knew what's going to happen, and they did not wake Netanyahu up. And Netanyahu keeps saying Netanyahu is the only one who didn't take responsibility for the failure of his government, of his policies towards Hamas. And he would say, if only they would wake me up earlier this night, I could have prevented this operation. I mean, this is, of course, insane to say and to believe that if he said, they didn't pull my jacket. They should have pulled my jacket, something like that, and wake me up. I mean,
but he got so many warnings.
Of course, and everybody got warning, and they didn't.
That something was cooking.
They did not interpret it rightly because they were sure they were caught in this concept that Hamas is deterred, and that they will not. I mean, there are many indications. But since Netanyahu refuses to establish an investigative committee to analyze what happened that led to this October 7th event, we don't know. I mean, there are many stories about that in the press over these 2 years, but nothing is comprehensive yet, unfortunately.
Yes, there's a question over there.
I want to follow up on that one. When you say that the Israeli media has a big focus on 7th of October still, is there any critical, you say there's some articles about what actually happened and also the Hannibal directive being put in place and stuff like that. Is that something that is highly criticized or highly kind of documented, or is it put to the side since Netanyahu do not want to engage with it and say that they want to end the war before they can start this committee and have a real investigation?
Hannibal Directive. Hannibal Directive.
Yeah, oh, that. There were stories about one incident in which hostages were collected in a house in one of the kibbutz Be'eri, and an Israeli tank shot the house and killed the hostages and the Hamas militants. This is what you're referring to? Actually, there was an investigative piece in New York Times, very, very impressive presentation of this investigation. The army investigated it, and the outcome of this investigation was that the soldiers were behaved properly. The survivors of the kibbutz did not accept this report by the army. They said that it was not proper, it was not fully comprehensive. This is really something very, very traumatic, what happened there. It's the House of Pessi, it's called. We don't really know. There were only 2 survivors there, and the rest of the hostages were killed by an Israeli tank, unfortunately. So but this is part of the stories that have not been told yet, fully investigated, you know. And if many, many people in Israel demand to have an investigative committee, you know, to do the job properly, but Netanyahu refuses to establish one, and he keeps saying that it needs to be a government committee formed by the government, so it would be more trustful, etc. But this is, I mean, this is, excuse me for saying that, this is bullshit, because how can you trust? If you nominate, you know, your investigators, how can you trust this to be not biased? And yeah.
Question for me, Anat. You have told us about threats against journalists and self-censorship. But in general, how much does Israeli people know about and care about the living conditions for Palestinians in Gaza and on the West Bank?
They don't care much. Although there is a portion of the Israeli society is very vibrant, as you said. I mean, there are parts in the Israeli society that do want to know about what's going on in Gaza. Some of them are protesting in front of the TV studios, demanding the television to report on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There was even a group of radical group of activists who invaded a live show of one of the most, you know, highly rated reality show, The Big Brother, crying and shouting, "Why don't you cover Gaza?" This was, you know, silenced immediately, but it was very viral on social media. So there are many, many people who do want to know what's going on in Hebrew. I mean, of course, everybody can log into and watch BBC, CNN, whatever. It's accessible in Israel. But they want the media to do their job. So, and there are many, as I told you, there are a lot of protests in the streets, and some of the protests are, you know, it's a very, very powerful protest led by Israeli activists, in which they stand and each holds a photo of a child in Gaza, a Palestinian child that was killed. And they stand in 2 lines, wearing black for an hour in silence. holding the photos of the dead children in Gaza. And this is really, really very, very powerful expression of caring for the innocent children who were killed as a collateral damage in Gaza. So the Israeli society is not homogenic in their views and in their opinions, and we can still do that, although the government's trying to suppress all these protests.
And can I have one more question if nobody else does now?
Yeah.
Press organizations all over the world have criticized the Israeli government for not letting foreign press into Gaza. Do you think it has had any impact on the government?
I think eventually it will have an impact because, all the big news agencies in the world like AP, Reuters, AFP, BBC, many journalists joined this petition to call the government of Israel to open the borders. Eventually, they will have no choice, and the foreign press will get in. I mean, they cannot block Gaza forever. Eventually, it will happen. And then, but I don't believe that the Israeli or some parts of the Israelis would accept this coverage of the foreign press. They would probably say that it is biased and that it's not fair towards Israel, and that the foreign press, like you said, neglected to understand the trauma of October 7th and the massacre, and the rapes and the sexual harassment of women and men on October 7th by Hamas militants. So they will protect themselves from, looking at the mirror, because it really is very traumatic, and to understand what has been done in your name by your own people and your own soldiers and everybody. Israel is small, like Norway is small. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody has somebody, family member or friend or husband or a son that is engaged in this war. So everything is very personal. It really is something that is overwhelming emotionally, politically, socially, to contain and to come in terms in all this. It's a big dilemma.
Did you want to elaborate on that?
Well, if you allow me, I have a question for Anat, if that's possible. Yeah, I would like to hear your views about the political future of Israel. We have been talking now about this meltdown on the 7th of October 2023 and how everything failed, the intelligence, the military, the technology, everything. And Netanyahu was the one with the responsibility, and as you said, he has not been willing to take that responsibility. But what will happen, do you think, in the elections? Will this come to haunt him in the next election, or do you think he will survive also the responsibility for this huge meltdown?
It's a very good question. I cannot predict, but we are entering an election year. Unfortunately, it's going to be very toxic. Society is polarizing deeply. Netanyahu lost the ability to, or maybe willingly, lost the ties to facts, and he is willingly engaged in all kinds of conspiracy theories, and he's spreading lies about deep state, and it's the same rhetoric as President Trump is using, and so he may want to take all the credit for bringing back the hostages, and not any responsibility on the failure of October 7th. The issue of the investigative committee is high on the public agenda. because all the heads, the chief of staff took responsibility and resigned. The head of Shin Bet took responsibility and resigned. The head of army intelligence took responsibility and resigned. Many, many people, you know, heads of the state agencies resigned and took responsibility. Netanyahu is the only one who refuses to do so. It depends on, many times it depends on, you know, the opposition and the ability of the opposition to unite, to reclaim the democratic values as opposed of this populism and deep state accusations and conspiracy theories, etc. I don't know how this will play out, and it's a very, very diverse community. We also have a heavy load of messianic religious people who believe in Jewish supremacy, in the fact that God promised the land to the Jewish people. This is why the Jewish people should, you know, occupy the whole land, and things like that that you are not familiar with because you're a secular country. But in Israel, there is a huge proportion of the society that are people of faith, and some of them are engaged in messianic ideas, and this may be very, very challenging. And of course, all these people who are ultra-Orthodox, who don't want to serve in the army, and they're like a burden on our economy. I will not get into this because it's very complicated, but you must know that it really is challenging. It's not just two camps, you know, the populist of Netanyahu and the democratic liberals. There are many, many groups and fractions.
Okay, if there's not any more questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question
okay.
for Anat.
Short one at the end.
Now that we are talking about the messianics, because Netanyahu is dependent on Smotrich and Ben Gvir in the government. They are, you know, extreme religious nationalists. Do you also think that this has been a religious war? Because their aim is to take Gaza in order to start making a greater Israel. I mean, Eretz Israel, to make it bigger, to prepare for the Messiah to come.
I think there was a shift in the conflict from a national conflict to a religious conflict, and this serves these messianic people like the Minister of Finance and the Minister of National Security, who was convicted in engaging in terrorism, by the way, and now he's the head of the national security. Yes, unfortunately, it is now more religious conflict than a national conflict, and it doesn't serve either, because Hamas is also a religious organization, and it's like it's a collision of two messianic ideas. And Hamas also wants to occupy the whole land, and their time frame is eternity, and they are sure that in eternity they will prevail. And our messianic, the Jews, also have the time frame of eternity, and they are sure that in eternity God promised us the land and we will conquer the whole land. I don't know how this will play out. I'm not a person of faith. I'm a secular person, and I want a solution now, not in eternity.
Okay, I think we'll draw the line there. I feel sort of the urge of seeing something positive. I mean, it's all very bleak, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank for Trump.
But hopefully we will see changes. Hopefully the press will get access soon. Cecil, will you go then? And
I would like to, but I think I will be completely in shock, because I know Gaza very well. I mean, I used to. Everything about Gaza now is in present tense. So I think it would be very shocking and traumatic to see Gaza completely destroyed, to see the people so heartbroken and traumatized.
And on that positive note, I want to thank the panel, distinguished panel. Thank you so much, Sissel Wold and Vebjørn Selbekk, and of course to our honored guest, Anat Saragusti. Thank you so much for coming and enlightening us on this topic. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Don't give up on us.